Alright, hi guys and welcome back to Creepypasta Stories and Info. I hope you enjoyed watching the first part of this first part of this creepypasta, and I hope you enjoy the second part. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, whatever you want to do. Yeah, I hope you enjoy. And if I don't say it at the end, which I think I do, this is Never Parrot. Ow, signing off. Alright, so it's still not the end of the paragraph, I'm just saying. I'm probably going to read it normally from now on. I'm just going to add words where words are needed and stop saying breathe. Also, it would appear that Ticci-Toby might be a proxy. A proxy. Not the proxy. A proxy. And this is very, very interesting. Like, I'm enjoying this. I really am. I want to say that this is really badly written, but it's really good. It's and if you're influencing anything to do with Slenderman, this probably isn't going to be on the wiki, so I'm going to leave a link to DeviantArt in the description. So let's keep reading! The next morning, Toby woke in his bed. He felt different. He wasn't tired at all, and when he consciously woke up, it felt like he had been lying there, awake for hours. He had no thoughts flying through his mind. He sat up slowly and stumbled over to the wall, but when he stood up, he automatically felt dizzy. He stumbled to the doorway and walked down the stairs, where his parents were. Lost all faith in humanity. His parents were. Where was I? His parents were sitting at the table. His father was in tune with a small TV that sat on the countertop, and his mother reading the newspaper. She quickly looked over when she felt Toby's presence looming behind her. "Well, good morning, sleepyhead. You've been sleeping forever," she greeted him with a hesitated smile. Toby slowly looked over at the clock and noticed that it was 12:30 p.m. "I made you breakfast, but it got cold. I was going to wake you, but I thought you needed sleep." Her expression fell from happy to worried as her son resisted responding to her. "Are you alright?" Toby stumbled over and sat by his father. He felt as if he was on idle, but had no control over his actions. He was seeing everything he did, but it didn't seem to register in his brain properly. He reached out to his father's arm, but his hand ended up getting slapped. His father turned to him abruptly and pushed his chair over with his foot. "Don't touch me, boy!" he yelled. His mother stood up. "Alright, knock that off. This is the last thing we need." The days went by, and things continued on as they were. Please fix this, if you can. Connie spent most of her time cleaning up the house, and her rude good job, and her rude husband spent most of his time ordering her around. It was just how it used to be before the crash. Toby never really left his room. He would sit by his bed and tremble. His mind would wander, but his thoughts changed too fast to be remembered. He would pace around his small room like a caged animal, or stare out the window. The unhealthy cycle continued. Before he could think twice, he would begin to chew on his hands, tearing the flesh from his fingers. He would gnaw his hands until they bled. When his mother walked in on him while he was doing so, she reacted horribly. She rushed him downstairs and grabbed the first aid, wrapping his hands in it. She demanded that he wouldn't leave her side from then. He isolated himself so much that he grew to hate being around others. His memory grew glitchy as well. He'd started missing memory of minutes, hours, days, and so on. He would begin talking nonsense, and about things completely unrelated to conversations he would have. He'd go off about seeing things, sharks in his sink as he washed the dishes, hearing crickets in his pillows, and seeing ghosts outside his bedroom window. All the nonsense landed him in a counsellor's office. His mother grew too anxious about his mental health. She decided it would be good for him to talk to a professional about what he was feeling. Connie walked Toby into the building, holding his hand and guiding him in. She walked him up to the front desk and began talking to the lady who sat behind it. "Mrs. Rogers?" Mrs. Rogers?" the lady asked. "Yes, that's me," Connie nodded. "We are here to see Dr. Oliver. I'm here with Toby Rogers." Yes, right this way." The lady stood up and led them down a long hallway. The The lady stood up and led them down along the hallway. Toby looked at the framed artwork down the hall and tuned in to the sound of the lady's high heels on the hardwood floor. Yeah. She opened the door to a room with a table and 2 chairs. "If we can get him to sit in here for a few minutes, I'll get the doctor." She smiled and held the door open. Toby stumbled into the room and sat down at the table. He looked over at his mother and the lady before the door slowly shut behind them. He looked around the room before he held up his tightly bandaged hands and began to bite at the bandages to unwrap his hands, but was interrupted as the door swung open and a young woman in black and white spotted dress and light blonde hair stepped in, holding a clipboard and a pen. "Toby?" she asked with a smile. Toby looked up at her and nodded. "Nice to meet you, Toby. My name is Dr. Oliver." What a twist! I thought Dr. Oliver was going to be a boy. Because, you know, I'm a sexist pig like that. She put her hand out for him to shake, but hesitantly pulled away when she noticed his bandaged hands. "Oh," she smiled nervously before clearing her throat and sitting in the chair across the table from him. "So, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Try to answer them as honestly as possible, okay?" She placed a clipboard down on the table. Toby nodded slowly and held his restrained hands on his lap. "How old are you, Toby?" 17, he responded quietly. She wrote that down on the paper that was clipped to the clipboard. "What is your full name?" "Toby Aaron Rogers." "What's your birthday?" "April 28th. Who is your immediate family?" Toby paused for a minute before answering her question. "My mum, my dad, and..." He stopped. "My sister." I heard about your sister, dear. I'm really sorry. Her affection... Her expression faded into a sad, pity-filled look. Toby nodded. "Do you remember anything from the crash, Toby?" Toby looked away from her. His mind went blank for a moment. He looked down at his lap and in the surrounding. He heard a faint ringing sound. His eyes widened as he froze in his place. "Toby?" the counsellor asked. Toby, are you listening?" Toby felt a shiver go down his spine until he froze once again and slowly looked over out the little window through the door. When he saw it, a dark, featureless figure peering in at him. He stared, eyes widened, the ringing growing louder and louder until suddenly the loud voice of the counsellor broke his trance. "Toby!" she yelled. Toby jumped and fell sideways out of his chair and back up into the corner. Dr. Oliver stood up, holding a clipboard to his chest, a surprised look in her eyes. Toby met her eyes again, his breath hitching as he twitched. Alright, so that's the third paragraph, I think. Did I mention in my video about, a Slender Man? Where a Slender Man will actually appear to people who have had bad experiences. If I have, I'll probably, put a little bit of a clip about now. Alright, so if I did say something, there should have been there probably still was a jump cut there, but that's only because I edited that last bit of my silence because of reasons. But also there was the other fact that, that was the other thing, oh yeah, if there was a bit of a really quick jump cut and no video or clip, then it's probably because, I did not actually mention that, and if I didn't mention that, then, yeah, Slender Man appears to people who have had very traumatic experiences, e.g. a car crash. But if I didn't say it, then, there was a jump cut right there, because I didn't say it, so, yay! Lots of editing! That night, Toby laid in bed, his eyes dazed as he stared straight up at his ceiling. He could feel himself begin to doze off, when he heard the scattering of footsteps down his hallway. Sorry, I had to yawn then, because of... Oh, sorry, there was another cut there. I had to edit because I yawned. I was really tired. He sat up and looked towards the doorway. His door wide open. There was no light. Everything was lit by the luminescent blue glow of the moon through his window, leaving a cold lighting. He stood up and slowly made his way towards the doorway, when suddenly the door, which was previously wide open, slammed in his face. He gasped and fell back. He was out of breath. He was out of breath when he hit the ground and began breathing heavily, his eyes wide open. He waited for a few seconds before getting back up on his feet. He reached out and grasped the cold door handle with his bandaged hand and creaked it open. He looked out into the dark hallway and tiptoed out of his room. The window at the end of the hallway lit up the darkness with blue moonlight as he padded his way down. He could hear footsteps rustling around him, and faint giggling led by the pitter-patter of small feet, which sounded like a child who had run in front of him, giggling and running around. The hallway was a lot longer than he had remembered. It seemed endless, like the ride home from the hospital. He heard a door creak in front of him. "Mom?" he called out in a shaky voice. Suddenly, a door slammed behind him and he jumped and turned around. Behind him he heard a long eerie groan from behind him. That sounded to croak right in his ear. He turned around as fast as he could and was suddenly face to face with none other than his dead sister. Her eyes were clouded white, her skin pale, and the right side of her jaw only dangling on by tissue and muscle. The glass protruded from her forehead and black blood leaking down her face. Her blonde hair pulled up in a ponytail as it always was, wearing her grey t-shirt and athlete shorts, which were dirty and spotted with blood. Her legs were bent in ways they shouldn't be. She stood, emitting a long croaking noise only an inch away from Toby's face. Toby yelped and fell back. Oh. It's a rather strange reaction. What sort of awe is that? Is that the ah you make when you see a little tiny kitten who's like a puppy and it's ah? Or is it like ah, like when you see something really terrifying like your mum taking a shit? I'm gonna go with the latter one, just because of reasons. He started to crawl backwards away from her, not able to break the eye contact he held with her blank, dead eyes. He dragged himself backwards until he backed up into something. He stood for a second. Everything was dead silent. Everything was dead silent except for his heavy breathing and crying. He slowly looked up to meet the blank face of a tall, dark figure that stood over him. Behind the tall, dark mass were rows of children, looking to range from 3 to 10 years, their eyes completely black and dark black blood leaked from their eye sockets. He screamed and stood up as fast as he could, only to be tripped by the dark black tendrils that wrapped around his ankle. He fell straight onto his stomach and got the wind knocked out of his chest. He tried to scream out, but he couldn't make a sound. He wheezed out before it all went black. Toby woke with a start. He screamed out and ran up, and he screamed out and sat up as fast as he could, completely short of breath. He wheezed out and held his chest with bandaged hands. It was just a dream. Just a dream. He laid back down on his bed, rolled over on his side. It felt like a giant weight had been lifted off his chest as he took deep breaths. He stood up and patted over his window. He saw nothing. Nobody was out there. No ghosts. No figures. Nothing. When he heard the rustling and coughing of his father out the doorway. His door was closed. He walked over and opened it, looking out the hallway once again. He glided down the hallway and into the kitchen where he found his dad standing and having a smoke in their living room. Toby waited a second and watched him from around the corner before a burning feeling started deep in his chest. Deep, boiling anger took over him. He heard the little imaginary voices in his head. "Do it! Do it! Do it!" they chanted. He turned away and held his arms. He felt like he actually had control over himself, unlike he did for the past few weeks since he'd gotten home from the hospital. He actually had complete thoughts for just moments before they were clouded by the chanting of the little voices in his head. "Kill him, he wasn't there, he wasn't there, kill him," they continued. Toby trembled. No, he wasn't going to do it. What was he going crazy? No, he won't kill anyone. He can't. He hated his father. But hated no way. He was going to kill him. That was it. The last thought he had before he fell into an idle state once again. The influence of the voices in his head were too much. He began to silently walk up behind his father. He reached over the counter to the knife holder in the kitchen. He pulled out the largest knife that had been resting in the case. He gripped it in his hand. He felt a sensation take over his chest. He let out a snicker. He began laughing so hard he had to gasp for breath. His father turned around abruptly before he felt a brute force shove him to the floor. He grunted as the hair was knocked out of him. He knocked my hair out of me! Oh god. What? He looked up at the boy who stood over him, grasping the kitchen knife in his hand. Toby, what are you doing? He went to sit up, and put hand arms out in front of him in self-defense. But before he knew it, Toby was on top of him. He wanted to grab his neck, but his father reached out and blocked his hand by grabbing onto his wrist. Stop! Get off me, you little fucker! He yelled, and with his other hand he threw an off-center punch towards Toby's shoulder. But he didn't stop. The look in Toby's eyes were not sane. It looked as if a demon had taken control over him. He yelled back and went to stab the knife into his father's chest, but he blocked him and grabbed onto his wrist once again. He went to shove him back, but Toby kicked out his feet in front of him and landed a hard blow straight on his face. His father recoiled and pulled his arms away to cuff his face, but Toby got back and drove the knife straight into his shoulder. His father let out a cry and went to pull the knife out, but before he could, Toby threw his fist straight into his face. He began to pound his fists into his head, laughing and wheezing. He cracked his neck and grabbed the knife and ripped it out of his shoulder. He drove it deep into his dad's chest and repeatedly stabbed him into his torso, blood spilling out and getting splattered everywhere. He didn't stop until his father's body went still. Toby, that kills people! He threw the knife over to the side and leaned over his body, coughing and panting. He stared at his smashed face and sat there twitching until a loud scream broke the silence. He looked over to see his mother standing a few feet away, covering her mouth, tears streaming down her eyes. Toby! She screamed. Why did you do that? She cried. Why? She screamed. We need to have a talk. No, I'm actually talking to the author right now. We are going to have a deep, meaningful conversation about the English language. Toby stood up and began to back away from his father's bloody corpse. He began to back out of the kitchen. He looked down at the blood-soaked bandages on his hands and looked up at his mother one last time before he turned and ran out of the house. He ran into the garage and slammed his head against the control panel on the wall and pushed the buttons to open the garage door. Before he ran out, his father's two hatchets that had been hanging on the tool rack above a table full of jars filled to the brim with old rusted nails and screws. One hatchet was new. It had a bright orange handle and a shiny blade. The other was old, with a wooden handle and a dull blade. He grabbed both and looked down at the table, and his eyes met a box of matches, and under the table was a red gasoline tank. He held both of the hatchets in one hand and grabbed the matches and the gasoline before running out of the garage. Down the driveway and up the street. As he approached the street light, he could see out his own bedroom window. He heard police sirens in the distance. He turned around as the red and blue flashing lights came rushing down the street. What? Wait. Rushing down the street. Toby stood for a second before he pulled open the cap of gasoline on the gasoline tank and ran down the street, spilling gasoline all over the street. As he struck it against... What? Spilling gasoline all down the street. After him. Spilling gasoline all over the street after him as he turned to run into the trees. He pulled the last bit of gasoline out before he reached in his pocket and pulled out a match. He struck it against the box and immediately dropped it. In an instant, flames burst out around him. The fire caught onto the trees and backed away into the forest around him. He looked around, but his vision was blurred. His heart was pounding, and he closed his eyes for a moment. This was it. This was the end. Toby felt a hand on his shoulder. He opened his eyes to see a large white hand with bony fingers that rested on his shoulder. He followed the arm that was attached to the hand to see, up to see a towering figure. It appeared to be wearing a dark black suit, and its face was completely blank. It towered over Toby's small frame and looked down on him. Tendrils reached out from its back. Before Toby knew it, his vision blurred, and he was surrounded by the sound of ringing in his ears. Everything went blank. That was it. That was the end. That was how Toby Rogers died. A few weeks later, Connie sat in her sister's kitchen. Her sister, Laurie, sat down next to her drinking a cup of coffee. About 3 weeks ago, Connie lost her husband and her son, and a few weeks before, she lost her daughter to a car crash. Since then, she moved in with her sister. The police were keeping her busy. They had just finished cleaning up the case, and the story had been released 2 weeks ago, and the focus of the world seemed to have shifted to completely new stories. Larry switched on the TV to a news broadcast. On the TV, the news reporter began introducing the headline. "We have breaking news. Last night there has been a reported murder of 4 individuals. There are no suspects yet, but the victims were found. But the victims were a bunch of middle school kids who had been out in the woods late last night. The kids had been bludgeoned and stabbed to death. The investigators had discovered a weapon at the crime scene which appears to be an old, dull-bladed hatchet, as you can see here. The picture changed. What? The picture changed to show snapshots of the weapon, exactly as it was left on the crime scene. The investigators had pulled the name of a possible suspect, Toby Rogers, a 17-year-old boy who a few weeks ago had stabbed his father to death and tried to cover up his escape by setting a fire in the streets and the forest area around the neighborhood. Although they had believed the young boy had died in the fire, investigators suspect that Toby Rogers may still be alive due to the fact that his body was never found. Alright, so, it's a very long creepypasta. I'm sorry it took so long, and I'm sorry that there might have been a lot of edits, scattered through this, episode. Alright, as I was saying, we need to talk. Were is spelled W-E-R-E. Breath is spelled B-R-E-A-T-H, not B-R-E-A-T-H-E. That's breathe. And W-H-E-R-E is where, as in where is it, not where as in what are you wearing. If I was going to ask you what are you wearing with W-H-E-R-E, it'd be very, very weird. And what are you wearing? That would be very, very strange as well. So, yeah, like I said, needs a few touch-ups, actually, but it's pretty accurate as to what would happen if you were, if your mind was being taken over by Slender Man. I, can't exactly know that for sure because, you know, I'm not under Slender Man's control, or aren't I? Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. You've been a wonderful audience. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button right in its face. I know you will. I know you love me. I know you can. Okay, now you really want to unsubscribe right now. Just go and do it because I just sang Justin Bieber. Just kill me. Right, if Ticci-Toby decides he's still alive, he can just come and kill me right now. I'm just waiting for the door to open and just have a hatchet, like, wedged in my back or something. It'd be funny. It hurt, but it'd be funny. So, thank you very much, guys. I feel like I should leave you with a creepy sort of, message. But I really can't be stopped. I'm too tired. I'm doing this because someone requested it to me, I think. Also, if you do have any requests for something you want to, read to me, or if you want to read something to me, you can just stop by my house anytime. We'll have coffee together, and we will watch Frozen very, very much. Also, there will be a link in the description if you want to send in fan art. I've probably put a little bit of a type of thing at the beginning, like saying fan art, post link in the description, blah blah blah. But if you want to go ahead and do that, I'd be very, very honoured. I'm stepping in headphones. I'm legitimately stepping in headphones. I'm like, I've got too many pairs of headphones and half of them are stuffed. Even this pair's stuffed. I only use it because of the microphone. I'm gonna get a new setup soon. So, just you and me. Kiss me, katot. Right, so thanks for watching. Uh, oh yeah, this is Nova Parrot, signing off.